Before a single stone was laid, the second man signed the completion certificate. He wrote the date of occupancy. He spoke about the finished building in the past tense, as something already done, already his, already an established fact in a dimension that the physical world had not yet caught up to. This is not how most men build. Most men wait for the visible before they claim the real. They will believe the structure is theirs when they can see it standing, when the evidence confirms the investment, when the world has validated what they desired. Two builders were commissioned to construct identical towers. The first built with hope, and hope is a posture that always faces forward, always defers, always places its object at a distance that moves as the man moves. The second built from a different assumption entirely. And his tower was complete in the invisible world before his hands had touched a single stone in the physical one. Neville Goddard teaches that the second man is not delusional. He is the only one who understands how reality is actually constructed. And the completion certificate he signed before the work began is the most legally binding document in existence. Every person who has ever wanted something has been taught to want it in the future tense. I will be wealthy. I am going to achieve this. Someday, this will be mine. These sentences feel like faith. They have the texture of patience, the sound of virtue, the appearance of a man who believes deeply enough to wait. Neville Goddard identifies them as something else entirely: the precise grammatical structure of permanent non-attainment. To place a desire in the future tense is to make a declaration about one's present state. And the declaration is always, without exception, the same. The man who will be wealthy is, at this moment, not wealthy. The man who is going to achieve is, at this moment, still reaching. The form of the sentence reveals the form of the assumption beneath it. And it is the assumption, not the sentence, that the universe answers. The future tense is not a bridge to the desired reality. It is a wall built between the man and his desire. A wall that feels like faith, but functions as refusal. Neville Goddard is precise on this point, with the precision of a man who has examined the mechanics of creation rather than merely its appearances. The universe does not distinguish between what a man says and what a man assumes. It reads only the assumption. And the assumption embedded in "I will be wealthy" is not wealth. It is the state of a man for whom wealth has not yet arrived. The universe, faithful to the letter of that assumption, keeps the desire exactly where the man placed it, permanently in the future, permanently approaching, permanently just beyond the reach of the present moment in which all creation actually occurs. This is the architecture that the done deal dismantles, not the future tense as a grammatical preference, but the inner posture it represents. The posture of a man perpetually in transit to a destination he never quite reaches. Because the act of being in transit is itself the deepest assumption he holds. The done deal operates in a different tense entirely. Not will be, not going to be. Done, finished, already established in the only dimension where creation actually occurs, the imagination, and therefore already inevitable in the physical world that imagination governs. The man who understands this does not build toward his wealth. He builds from it. He has already signed the certificate, and what follows in the physical world is not the result of his effort. It is merely the result of his assumption catching up to the matter it was always going to organize. In this examination of Neville Goddard's teaching, we will reveal what he called the done deal, the single assumption that, when genuinely inhabited rather than merely understood, collapses the distance between desire and reality entirely. This is not a principle to be filed alongside other principles. It is not a technique to be added to a repertoire. It is the foundational law of creation as Neville understood it, derived from decades of rigorous inner work and presented not as inspiration, but as metaphysical fact. We will trace this law to its source, expose the precise inner architecture it requires, and distinguish the inhabited assumption from its pale intellectual imitation. The kind that produces nothing, because it exists only in the mind's surface and never penetrates the deeper stratum where actual creation occurs. We will show you the precise mechanics of what Neville meant when he instructed his students to live from the end, not as a poetic instruction, but as a daily discipline of consciousness with specific, verifiable effects. We will examine why the universe responds to the assumption of completion with what Neville called the bridge of incidents, a chain of events and circumstances organized by the subconscious mind to externalize the inner state the man has made his permanent residence. And we will distinguish this principle from every lesser version of it that circulates in the world under borrowed names. Versions that fail not because the principle is flawed, but because the practitioner never crossed the line between intellectual understanding and actual assumption. Before we proceed, there is one thing you must understand about the nature of what follows. This is not a discussion about possibility. Neville Goddard did not teach in the language of possibility. He taught in the language of law. What you will encounter in this examination is not a framework to try, not a perspective to consider, not a set of tools to experiment with. It is a description of how the creative process actually works, how it has always worked for every man, whether he understood it or not. The only choice a man possesses is whether he will use this process deliberately or whether he will continue to use it unconsciously, which is to say, by default, by assumption, as he always has been. The done deal is not a new power. It is the recognition of a power that was never absent. Neville Goddard's entire body of teaching rests on a single, autoradical metaphysical claim, stated without qualification and without the hedging that characterizes lesser thinkers who are uncertain whether they can bear the full weight of what they have perceived. The claim is this: assumptions, if persisted in, harden into fact, not occasionally, not for some people under some conditions, not as a general tendency that correlates with positive outcomes in a statistical sense. Always, for every person, without exception, as a law as reliable as gravity and as impersonal as mathematics. This claim is not offered as a belief to be adopted on faith. It is offered as a description of a mechanism, the actual mechanism by which the invisible world constructs the visible one. To understand Neville is, first and finally, to understand what an assumption actually is and what it actually does. An assumption, in Neville's precise usage, is not an opinion. It is not a conscious statement of belief that a man makes about himself and his circumstances. It is something far more fundamental: the state of consciousness from which a man perceives his world. Every man, at every moment, perceives his life from within a particular state, a particular configuration of feeling, expectation, and inner certainty about what is real and what is possible for him specifically. That state is his dominant assumption, and the world that surrounds him, the opportunities that appear, the people who enter his life, the circumstances that seem to arise independently of his will, is not the cause of that state. It is the effect. The assumption is not a reflection of the man's reality. It is the cause of it. This distinction, once genuinely understood rather than merely acknowledged, changes everything. Consider the man who assumes poverty. He may not announce this assumption. He may not be consciously aware that he holds it. He may, in fact, be actively and earnestly telling himself a different story, reciting affirmations, constructing vision boards, attending seminars where other men tell him that abundance is his birthright. None of this penetrates the level at which the assumption actually operates. The assumption of poverty does not live in the conscious mind. It lives in the deeper stratum that Neville calls the subconscious. And it expresses itself not in what the man says, but in what the man feels when he encounters money, when he imagines his future, when he makes a decision under pressure. The assumption is the water the man swims in. So constant, so pervasive, so taken for granted, that it is invisible to him even as it governs every outcome he produces. This is why the man who assumes poverty is not wrong about his life. He is, with painful accuracy, describing the world that his assumption has constructed for him. His evidence is real. His circumstances are real. But neither his evidence nor his circumstances are the cause of his condition. They are its product. Neville teaches that the man who attempts to change his circumstances without first changing his assumption is engaging in a form of futility that cannot be corrected by increased effort. He is rearranging the visible effects of an invisible cause while leaving the cause entirely intact. The poverty he sees is the poverty he assumes. Change the assumption, genuinely, at depth, with the persistence required to make it the new dominant state of consciousness. And the circumstances have no choice but to rearrange themselves. They are, in Neville's framework, the shadow of the assumption. When the light changes, the shadow must change with it. The assumption, then, is not merely an attitude or a perspective or a mental frame. It is the actual creative act by which the invisible world constructs the visible one. Neville draws this understanding directly from his interpretation of Scripture, specifically from the principle that God creates by assuming the reality of that which is not yet physically manifest and persisting in that assumption until it is. "Call things that be not as though they were," writes the Apostle. And Neville takes this not as a poetic flourish, but as a precise description of the creative mechanism available to every man. The man who assumes wealth is already his is not engaged in positive thinking. He is engaged in the fundamental creative act of the universe. He is doing what creation does, assuming a state and watching it become. What distinguishes Neville's teaching from the wide field of metaphysical philosophy that surrounds it is the specificity of this claim. Other teachers speak of consciousness, of vibration, of the law of attraction, of faith. Neville speaks of assumption, and the precision of that word is everything. An assumption can be inhabited. It can be felt. It can be tested against the inner experience of the man who holds it. The question is not, "Do I believe in abundance?" A question that can be answered with the conscious mind, regardless of what the deeper stratum holds. The question is, "What do I assume?" And the answer to that question is not found by asking it. It is found by examining what the man's life has actually produced, because the life is the assumption made visible, and it does not lie. The assumption as creative law means something specific about the nature of persistence. Neville does not say that an assumption produces results immediately upon being adopted. He says it produces results when it is persisted in, when it becomes not a thought the man holds occasionally, but the state the man inhabits consistently, the lens through which he perceives everything, the inner certainty so deep and so stable that it no longer requires the effort of maintenance. This distinction between holding an assumption and inhabiting it is the difference between a seed placed on the surface of the ground and a seed driven into the soil. Both exist. Only one takes root. The assumption that hardens into fact is the one that has been driven deep enough, through persistence, to become the man's dominant state. Not his most recent thought, but his most fundamental sense of what is real. This is the first and most important thing to understand about why most applications of Neville's principle fail. They fail not because the principle is flawed, but because the assumption was never truly inhabited. The man recited the affirmation. He performed the visualization. He attended to the instruction with his conscious mind, but at the level of assumption, at the level of what he actually felt in his body, in the still moments before sleep, in the automatic interpretation of every event that arrived in his life. The old assumption remained, and the old assumption, being deeper and more consistently inhabited, continued to govern the world he experienced. The new assumption was a visitor. The old assumption was a resident. And the law of assumption does not respond to visitors. It responds only to those who have taken up permanent residence. The law is impersonal in a way that demands both respect and precision. It does not favor the man who deserves abundance over the man who has been conditioned to assume lack. It does not reward effort, virtue, or intelligence. It responds to assumption alone, with the same indifference that gravity responds to the mass of an object. Without judgment, without preference, without the possibility of exception. This impersonality is not a cruelty. It is a precision that, once understood, becomes the most liberating fact in a man's inner life. It means that no circumstance, no history, no evidence, no consensus of others can prevent the manifestation of a genuinely inhabited assumption. The law does not consult the bank statement before it operates. It consults only the assumption, and the assumption is always, entirely, within the man's dominion. To say that assumptions harden into fact is also to say something about the nature of time in Neville's cosmology. Time, in the physical world, is the medium through which an assumption moves from its invisible state to its visible expression. The assumption does not wait for time. Time serves the assumption. The man who has genuinely inhabited the assumption of wealth does not experience time as an obstacle between himself and his desire. He experiences it as the process by which what is already true in the inner world becomes apparent in the outer one. This is a subtle but critical distinction. The man who waits experiences time as distance. The man who has assumed experiences time as the natural unfolding of something already established. One posture produces anxiety. The other produces a settled, unhurried certainty that is itself the most reliable signal that the assumption has taken root. Neville is unequivocal on the question of whether this law applies to wealth specifically. He does not confine it to spiritual matters or to the development of inner character. He applies it to the full spectrum of human desire. To money, to position, to relationships, to circumstances of every kind. Because the creative mechanism does not distinguish between categories of desire. It responds to assumption. And the assumption of financial reality is as subject to this law as any other. The man who assumes wealth belongs to him, who inhabits that assumption with the same organic, taken-for-granted certainty with which he assumes his own name belongs to him, will find that the physical world begins to organize itself around that assumption in ways that no external analysis could have predicted. Not because the universe is conspiring in his favor, because the assumption is the cause, and the physical arrangement is the effect. As above, so below. As within, so without. Always. One of the most important implications of the assumption as creative law concerns what Neville calls states. A state, in his terminology, is a complete configuration of consciousness, a particular arrangement of feeling, belief, and inner certainty that has its own characteristic perception of the world. Every man exists within some state at every moment. The state of poverty has its own way of seeing opportunities, its own automatic interpretation of setbacks, its own deeply embedded sense of what is and is not possible. The state of wealth has a completely different configuration. It perceives the same world through a different lens and produces, through the mechanism of assumption, a different world in response. Moving from one state to another is not a matter of thinking different thoughts. It is a matter of changing one's fundamental residence in consciousness, vacating the old state and taking up genuine occupancy in the new one. This is what Neville means by the done deal. Not a new thought, a new state. Inhabited, persisted in, hardened into the new creative assumption from which the physical world will inevitably be constructed. The assumption as creative law also reframes the concept of faith in a manner that strips it of its passive connotation and restores it to the active creative force Neville recognizes it to be. Faith, in the conventional understanding, is the willingness to believe in something one cannot yet see, a virtue exercised in the absence of evidence. In Neville's framework, faith is something more precise and more demanding. It is the ability to treat the unseen assumption as more real than the seen circumstances, to give more creative authority to what is held in the imagination than to what is reported by the physical senses. This is not easy. The physical senses are loud, immediate, and persistent. They present their evidence with the force of reality itself. The man who can consistently hold his assumption against the full weight of contrary sensory evidence, who can look at an empty bank account and, at the level of assumption, know that he is wealthy, is exercising a creative force of the highest order. That force, Neville teaches, is irresistible. The final dimension of the assumption as creative law that must be understood before proceeding is its relationship to the concept of responsibility. If assumption is the cause of all experienced reality, then the man who understands this law cannot assign the cause of his circumstances to anything outside himself, not to the economy, not to his past, not to the decisions of others, not to conditions that arrived before he was old enough to choose. Every condition he inhabits now is the product of assumptions held, consciously or unconsciously, with sufficient persistence to harden into the circumstances he is presently experiencing. This is not a judgment. It is a description of the mechanism. And within this description is contained the most radical liberation available to a human being. If assumption is the cause, then changing the assumption genuinely, persistently, at depth, is the only change that matters. Everything else is secondary. Everything else will follow. The architecture of what Neville Goddard calls the done deal is not a visualization practice in the sense that term is commonly understood. It is not a procedure for generating mental images with sufficient vividness that the subconscious is impressed by their detail. It is something both simpler and more exacting than that. A specific inner posture that, once genuinely occupied, requires no technique, no procedure, and no repeated performance. It is the posture of the man who has already received. Not the man who is receiving, not the man who expects to receive, not the man who has good reason to believe he will eventually receive. The man who has received, past tense, settled, complete, requiring no further confirmation from the physical world than a completed transaction, requires further notarization after both parties have signed. The distinction between has received and expects to receive is not a grammatical preference. It is the difference between two entirely different states of consciousness, two entirely different creative assumptions that produce, with mathematical precision, two entirely different physical realities. The man who expects to receive is still in a relationship of distance with his desire. The expectation, however confident, is pointed forward. It is an orientation toward something that has not yet arrived, and the dominant assumption embedded in expectation, beneath all its optimism, is the assumption of not yet. The universe, as Neville teaches, reads the dominant assumption beneath the surface statement. It does not hear, "I expect to be wealthy." It hears, "I am not yet wealthy, but I am oriented in that direction." And it answers that assumption faithfully. Not yet, oriented, moving toward, but not arrived. The man who has received is in an entirely different relationship with his desire. And the word relationship is almost wrong here, because a relationship implies two parties. The man who has received is not in a relationship with his wealth. He is in a state of union with it. It is not something he is oriented toward. It is something he inhabits, and this inhabitation is the precise inner movement that transforms assumption from concept into creative force. Neville names this movement looking from rather than looking at, and the distinction is precise enough to warrant dwelling in. The man looking at his wealth is observing it from outside, from the position of one who does not yet possess it. He can see it, he can describe it, he can feel the pull of it, but he is standing apart from it. And his standing apart is the most eloquent expression of his dominant assumption. The man looking from his wealth is inside it. He sees everything else from within the state of having it. His vantage point has changed, and the vantage point is the assumption. What does it actually feel like from the inside to occupy the posture of having already received? This is the question that Neville returns to repeatedly in his lectures and writing, because the intellectual understanding of the posture is entirely insufficient. A man can understand the concept of completion perfectly and still be inhabiting the state of incompletion at every moment. The feeling Neville points to is not excitement. Excitement is the feeling of a man who has just received an unexpected gift. It contains, within its intensity, the implicit memory of the time before receipt. The feeling of the done deal is quieter and more fundamental than excitement. It is the feeling of the taken for granted. It is the feeling a man has about his own name, a certainty so deep, so automatic, so entirely undemonstrative that it requires no thought, no affirmation, and no evidence to sustain itself. The wealthy man who is genuinely wealthy does not feel excited about his wealth in the morning. He feels it the way he feels his own heartbeat, as a constant, unremarkable, organic fact of his existence. This quality of the taken for granted is the signature of the genuinely inhabited assumption. And it is also the quality most conspicuously absent from the majority of manifestation attempts. Most practitioners approach the desired state with the reverence of a supplicant approaching a shrine, with effort, with ceremony, with an implicit acknowledgement that what they are approaching is not their natural state, but a special condition they are attempting to invoke. This reverence is, paradoxically, the most reliable evidence that the assumption has not taken root. The man who is genuinely wealthy does not approach his wealth reverently. He takes it entirely for granted, the way a man takes for granted the assumption that the floor will support his weight when he steps out of bed in the morning. The done deal, fully inhabited, produces this quality of unremarkable certainty. Nothing special. Simply true. Simply his. Simply the way things are. Neville frequently uses the word revision in a context that illuminates the done deal's architecture from a different angle. Revision, for Neville, is the practice of rewriting the past in imagination, of replacing the memory of an undesired event with the memory of the desired one, felt as vividly and completely as the original. The purpose of revision is not to deny what happened. It is to change the assumption that the remembered event installed in the subconscious. But the same principle that governs revision governs the done deal. The subconscious does not distinguish between a physically experienced event and a vividly inhabited imaginal one. It treats both as equally real, equally established, equally deserving of expression in the physical world. The done deal is, in this sense, the revision of a future that has not yet physically occurred. The installation of the memory of receipt before the physical event that would normally generate that memory. The subconscious receives this memory, accepts it as established fact, and proceeds to organize physical reality around it. This is not metaphor. This is, in Neville's precise teaching, mechanism. The logical structure of the done deal rests on a principle that Neville derives from his reading of Scripture and articulates with the precision of a metaphysician. Before they call, I will answer. This single statement contains, in Neville's interpretation, the complete cosmological framework within which the done deal operates. The creative intelligence of the universe does not wait for physical conditions to align before providing what is desired. It answers the call in the invisible world, the world of assumption, before any physical form has been organized. The done deal is the recognition and deliberate use of this principle. The man who has signed the completion certificate before a stone is laid is not practicing optimism. He is aligning himself with a creative process that was always going to answer in the invisible before manifesting in the visible. He is simply placing his assumption in the correct temporal relationship with the creative act, ahead of the physical expression, not behind it. The done deal also has a precise relationship with what Neville calls the bridge of incidents. Once the inner assumption of completion is genuinely inhabited, once the subconscious has accepted the imaginal event as established fact, the bridge of incidents appears. This is the series of events, circumstances, encounters, and seemingly coincidental developments through which the physical world begins to organize itself around the inner assumption. The man who understands the done deal does not need to plan this bridge. He does not need to strategize or engineer the route by which his wealth will arrive. His only task is to maintain the assumption of completion while remaining alert and responsive to the bridge as it forms beneath his feet. The bridge is organized by the creative intelligence of the subconscious, which has access to far more variables than the conscious mind can perceive, and it will route itself through whatever channels offer the least resistance. The man's only task is to move when the bridge moves and to maintain his inner posture of completion regardless of how the bridge looks at any given moment. What interrupts the bridge, what causes it to dissolve before the physical destination is reached, is the abandonment of the assumption, not the presence of challenges, not the slowness of the physical process, not the appearance of contrary evidence. These are all normal features of the bridge, and none of them indicate that the done deal has failed. What interrupts the bridge is the man's decision, conscious or unconscious, to return to the state of not yet, to allow the sight of the empty bank account or the persistence of the old circumstance to overwrite the inner assumption of completion. When this happens, the subconscious, faithful to assumption above all else, dissolves the bridge it was building and begins to construct a new one, routed toward the new dominant assumption, which is, again, lack. This is why Neville's most consistent instruction is not to visualize more forcefully, not to affirm more frequently, but to persist, to hold the assumption of completion against the full weight of contrary physical evidence, for as long as required, until the physical world has no choice but to conform to the inner state. The man refuses to abandon. The architecture of the done deal includes a specific understanding of what doubt is and how it operates. Doubt, in the conventional understanding, is the intellectual position of uncertainty, the mind's reluctance to commit fully to a belief it cannot prove. In Neville's framework, doubt is something more precise and more destructive. It is the intrusion of the old assumption. When a man inhabiting the done deal feels doubt, what he is actually feeling is the residual force of the deeply conditioned assumption of lack attempting to reassert its dominance. The doubt does not mean the assumption is wrong. It does not mean the creative process has been interrupted. It means the old assumption is sufficiently powerful that the new one has not yet displaced it at the deepest level of consciousness. The response to doubt, for the man who understands the done deal, is not argumentation or suppression. It is simply the return to the assumption of completion. The quiet, deliberate reoccupation of the inner posture of the man who has already received. Every time the man returns to that posture after a moment of doubt, the new assumption grows stronger. Every time he allows the doubt to stand unchallenged, the old assumption grows stronger. Persistence is not a virtue here, it is a law. The done deal, in its complete architecture, also requires an understanding of what Neville calls the state of the other fellow. When a man inhabits the assumption of completion regarding his wealth, the people in his life do not remain unchanged. They begin to reflect his assumption back to him. This is not a metaphysical abstraction. It is the practical expression of the principle that all human interaction is mediated through the assumptions each party holds about the other. The man who assumes he is wealthy is met by others, eventually, as the assumption hardens, as a wealthy man. He is perceived differently. He is treated differently. Opportunities are extended to him that were not extended to the man he was before. This is not because the world is performing for him. It is because the assumption he holds about himself changes the signal he sends into every interaction. And other people respond to that signal with the same fidelity that the universe responds to assumption in general. The outer world is always, in this sense, the mirror of the inner assumption. There is a specific quality of action that accompanies the genuinely inhabited done deal. And it is a quality that distinguishes it from both passive waiting and anxious striving. Neville does not teach inaction. He teaches what might be called inspired action, the kind of movement that arises naturally from within the assumption of completion rather than being driven by the anxiety of incompletion. The man who genuinely inhabits the done deal is not sitting still, waiting for his wealth to materialize out of the air. He is moving through his life with the unhurried, purposeful quality of a man who already knows where he's going because he has already arrived. He makes decisions. He takes opportunities. He works. But he works as a wealthy man in the process of expressing his nature, not as a man in deficit trying to fill a gap. the quality of the action changes completely. And that change in quality, which is the change in assumption expressed through behavior, is itself part of the bridge that the subconscious is building. The final element of the done deal's architecture is what might be called its relationship to the present moment. Neville teaches that the imagination exists outside of time, as the physical mind understands it. That the imaginal act, fully inhabited, is not a prediction about the future, but a fact in an eternal present. When the man enters the state of the man who has already received, he is not imagining a future. He is occupying a present. The wealth he inhabits in imagination is not waiting in a future that has not yet arrived. It exists in the only dimension where anything actually exists, right now, in the present moment of the imaginal act. The physical manifestation that follows is not the creation of the wealth. It is the reflection, in the slower medium of physical matter, of what has already been created in the faster medium of imagination. This understanding is what gives the done deal its characteristic quality of absolute certainty. Not optimism about a future, but recognition of a present. The wealth is not coming. It is already here, in the only world that matters. And the physical world will, in time, confirm what the inner world already knows. Wattles, writing in his foundational text at the opening of the 20th century, instructs the man who would cooperate with what he calls the formless substance to hold a clear mental image of what he desires and to relate himself to it with unwavering faith. This instruction is precise in its demand and deliberately vague in its mechanism. Wattles knows that the certainty of the inner state is the variable that governs whether the formless substance responds by organizing physical matter in the desired configuration. He knows that the image alone is insufficient, that an image held with doubt or with the anxious monitoring of a man unsure of his own creative authority will not produce the same effect as an image held with the settled conviction of a man who considers the result already assured. What Wattles prescribes is the condition. What he does not fully explain is the precise inner architecture of that condition. What unwavering faith actually feels like from the inside, and how a man is to enter it deliberately rather than stumbling upon it by accident. Neville Goddard provides the deepest possible understanding of what Wattles' unwavering faith actually means. And he provides it not as a description of a mental attitude, but as a description of a specific state of consciousness with identifiable, inhabitable characteristics. Unwavering faith, in Neville's framework, is not confidence about a future outcome. It is certainty about a present fact in the imaginal world. The man who possesses unwavering faith in Neville's sense is not the man who is very confident that his desired wealth will arrive. He is the man who already knows himself to be in possession of it, who has entered the state of the man who has already received and who cannot be dislodged from that state by any counter-evidence the physical world presents. This is not a subtle distinction. It is the difference between two entirely different creative postures. And Neville's contribution to Wattles' framework is precisely the identification of this difference and the specification of the inner posture that reliably produces the result Wattles describes. Wattles commands the practitioner to think in the certain way, to hold the mental image with a specific quality of conviction that he distinguishes sharply from the vague, unfocused wishing that produces nothing. The certain way, as Wattles describes it, involves treating the desired reality as already provided, holding the image with gratitude, as a man gives thanks for something already received rather than appealing for something not yet given. This instruction is, in essence, an instruction to inhabit the done deal. The gratitude Wattles prescribes is not the gratitude of a man who expects to be grateful at some future point. It is the gratitude of a man who already has what he desired. A gratitude that can only exist if the inner assumption is already one of completion. Wattles arrives at the done deal through the language of gratitude and faith. Neville arrives at it through the language of assumption and state. They are describing the same inner posture from different angles, and the convergence of their descriptions is not coincidental. It is the convergence of two independent investigations arriving at the same law. What Neville adds to Wattles' framework, the specific contribution that elevates the done deal from spiritual instruction to practical mechanics, is the identification of the subconscious as the mediating mechanism between the inner assumption and the physical result. Wattles speaks of the formless substance. Responding to the man's mental image, Neville specifies the channel through which this response operates. The subconscious mind, which accepts the vividly inhabited imaginal act as a physically experienced event and proceeds, through what he calls the bridge of incidents, to organize the physical world accordingly. This is not a contradiction of Wattles. It is its explanation. The formless substance that Wattles describes as the creative intelligence of the universe is, in Neville's framework, not separate from the man's own deep consciousness. It is his subconscious mind, the part of him that is connected to all other things, that operates outside the limitations of linear time, and that constructs the physical world in response to the dominant assumptions it receives from the conscious mind. The precision of Neville's contribution to Wattles' instruction becomes most apparent when we consider the specific failure mode that both teachers are attempting to address. Wattles warns his reader not to look for the wealth you want in advance of its receipt, not to examine the physical world for evidence that the creative process is working, because this examination is itself an expression of doubt. And doubt interrupts the creative flow between the formless substance and the man seeking to receive from it. Neville explains the deeper mechanism of this instruction. The man who looks for evidence is inhabiting the state of the man who does not yet have evidence, which is the state of the man who does not yet have the desired reality. And by inhabiting that state, he is feeding the assumption of incompletion back into the creative mechanism. Wattles identifies the behavior as destructive. Neville explains why it is destructive at the level of assumption. Together, these two teachings form a complete and mutually reinforcing account of the precise inner posture required for creation to proceed without interruption. There is a dimension of Wattles' teaching that achieves its full significance only when read through Neville's lens, and that is his instruction regarding what he calls acting in the certain way. Wattles is explicit that the man who thinks in the certain way must also act in the certain way, that inner assumption and outer action must be aligned for the creative process to proceed with maximum efficiency. The man who holds the mental image of wealth but acts as though he is poor, who makes every decision from the state of insufficiency while telling himself inwardly that he is wealthy, is sending divided instructions to the creative intelligence. The inner assumption says one thing, the outer action says another. And the outer action, being the more consistently expressed of the two, tends to reflect the deeper assumption more accurately than the inner statement. Neville's done deal addresses this directly. The man who genuinely inhabits the assumption of completion will naturally act from that assumption, because the action is the natural expression of the state. One does not need to discipline oneself to act wealthy if one genuinely inhabits the assumption of being wealthy. The action follows the state as the shadow follows the object. The connection between Neville's done deal and Wattles' framework also illuminates a frequently misunderstood aspect of Wattles' concept of efficient action. Wattles insists that the man who thinks in the certain way must work, must apply himself with efficiency and intelligence to every task that comes before him, and that this work is not supplemental to the creative process, but integral to it. Some readers interpret this as a contradiction of the metaphysical framework. If the formless substance is organizing reality in response to the inner state, why must the man work? Neville's done deal resolves this apparent tension completely. The bridge of incidents, the chain of events through which the subconscious organizes physical reality around the inner assumption, requires the man's participation. Opportunities will appear, doors will open, connections will form, but they require the man to act, to walk through the doors that his assumption has caused to appear. The work in Neville's framework is not the cause of the manifestation. It is the man's cooperation with the bridge that his assumption is building. Both Wattles and Neville arrive at the same understanding of the relationship between time and the creative process, though they express it in different vocabularies. Wattles teaches that the formless substance contains the form of everything that the advancing man can desire, and that this form is provided in the invisible world before it manifests in the visible one. Neville teaches that the imaginal act exists in an eternal present, and that the physical manifestation is merely the reflection of the imaginal fact in the slower medium of matter. Both are saying the same thing. The desired reality exists in a dimension more fundamental than the physical, before the physical world has organized itself to express it. The done deal is the inner act of claiming that pre-existing reality, of placing oneself in imagination and assumption, in conscious contact with what already exists in the invisible world, and doing so with the settled certainty of a man who is not creating something from nothing, but recognizing something that is already there. This is the deepest possible understanding of unwavering faith, not confidence in a future, recognition of a present. The Wattles link also clarifies the role of gratitude in the done deal. Neville does not frequently use the word gratitude in the way Wattles uses it, but the inner state he prescribes is functionally identical to the gratitude Wattles describes. Both teachers are pointing to the same quality: the inner posture of a man who already has what he desired and who relates to it as a fact rather than a hope. Gratitude, properly understood, is not a feeling directed toward the future. It is a feeling arising from the present, the feeling that arises naturally when a man is in genuine possession of something he values. The man who feels genuine gratitude for his wealth before it physically manifests is, by definition, inhabiting the assumption that it is already his. He is in the done deal whether he uses that language or not. And the universe, the formless substance, the subconscious creative intelligence, answers that inner state of completion with the physical confirmation that is its inevitable expression. The synthesis of Wattles and Neville on this point has a practical implication that distinguishes the done deal practitioner from the casual student of both teachings. The casual student reads Wattles and attempts to hold a clear mental image with confidence. The casual student reads Neville and attempts to visualize vividly. Neither produces reliable results because neither has penetrated to the level of actual assumption. The practitioner who has understood both, who has grasped that unwavering faith is the feeling of completion, that gratitude is the natural inner state of the man who already has, and that the done deal is the deliberate inhabitation of that state as the dominant creative assumption, is engaged in something entirely different. He is not performing a technique. He is occupying a state. And the state, when genuinely occupied with sufficient persistence, is the creative act itself. The physical manifestation does not follow because the man was diligent in his practice. It follows because the assumption has hardened into fact, as it always does. Without exception, the bridge between Wattles' certain way and Neville's done deal is ultimately a bridge between two descriptions of the same creative law expressed in different centuries, through different vocabularies, by two men who independently arrived at the same profound recognition. Wattles saw the formless substance responding to the man who relates to his desire as already provided. Neville saw the subconscious accepting the imaginal act as established fact and organizing physical reality around it. Both saw the same mechanism. Both prescribed the same inner posture. And both arrived at the same practical instruction, stated with the quiet certainty of men who were not speculating but reporting. Treat the desired reality as already done. Relate to it as a present fact rather than a future hope. And allow the creative intelligence of the universe, which needs no instruction on how to bridge the invisible to the visible, only the inner assumption to respond to do what it has always done. Organize the world around what the man has assumed to be true. Wattles warns against the anxious monitoring of results with a consistency and force that suggests he understood exactly how central this failure is to the breakdown of the creative process. He returns to it again and again in his writing. The man who holds his mental image on Monday with certainty and on Tuesday examines the physical world to see whether the process is working, and on Wednesday is shaken by the absence of evidence, and by Thursday has dissolved the image entirely and replaced it with a deepened assumption of lack. Wattles identifies this monitoring as the precise behavior that interrupts the flow between the formless substance and the man seeking to receive from it. He commands his reader to maintain the image, to hold the faith, to avoid the gravitational pull of the current physical conditions as an interpretation of whether the creative process is proceeding. His instruction is clear, but he does not fully explain what compels the man to monitor, what makes the checking feel not only natural but urgent, not only understandable but necessary. It is Neville Goddard who provides the explanation, and it reaches deeper than Wattles' warning. The anxious monitoring of results is not, at its root, a failure of discipline. It is not a character defect or a weakness of will. It is the behavioral expression of a specific assumption, the assumption of incompletion. Every time a man checks whether his desire is arriving, he is performing, in the physical world, the exact action that his dominant inner assumption dictates. He is checking because, at the level of assumption, he does not yet know. He is in the state of the man who is waiting, who is uncertain, who requires external confirmation that the process is working. Because the internal confirmation, the settled, organic certainty of the done deal, is absent. The monitoring is not the cause of the interruption to the creative process. It is the symptom. The cause is the assumption of incompletion that underlies it. And this is the most important reason Wattles' warning, while accurate, is insufficient on its own. A man cannot stop monitoring his results by disciplining himself not to look. He can only stop monitoring when the assumption of incompletion has been replaced by the assumption of completion. When the done deal is so genuinely inhabited, the checking becomes not merely unnecessary, but incoherent. Consider what it would mean for a man who genuinely knows he is wealthy to check whether his wealth is arriving. The question itself reveals the assumption. A man does not check the arrival of something he already possesses. He does not monitor the delivery of a package that is already in his hands. The wealthy man does not examine the universe for signs that his wealth is real. He lives from that reality with the same unreflective certainty with which he lives from the reality of his own physical existence. The monitoring is only possible when the assumption of not yet is in place. When the man is relating to his desired reality as a delivery expected rather than a possession confirmed, and the monitoring perpetuates the assumption that generates it. Because every act of checking is simultaneously an act of confirming at the level of subconscious impression that the desired state has not yet been reached. The cycle is self-reinforcing, and it can only be broken by the one thing that interrupts it at its source: the genuine assumption of completion. The destructive quality of monitoring is compounded by a phenomenon that Neville identifies and that Wattles implies without naming. The fact that the physical world, in the early stages of a new assumption, will almost always present contrary evidence. This is not a test. It is not a cosmic challenge to the man's worthiness. It is simply the nature of a creative process that operates through time. The inner assumption changes first. The physical world catches up second. And the interval between these two events, which may be days, weeks, or months depending on the depth and persistence of the assumption, is the period during which the man is most likely to monitor, and during which the evidence of monitoring is most likely to be discouraging. The man who understands this as a feature of the creative process rather than as a sign of failure maintains his assumption without the anxiety that monitoring generates. The man who does not understand it falls into the cycle of checking, finding insufficient evidence, doubting, weakening the assumption, and producing results that confirm his doubt. Wattles saw this cycle. Neville explained it, and the explanation makes the done deal not just a desirable inner posture, but an absolutely necessary one. There is a specific form of monitoring that is more insidious than the direct examination of physical results, and it is one that Neville's framework identifies with particular precision. This is the monitoring that occurs through conversation. The man who, having adopted the assumption of wealth, discusses his financial situation with others in terms that reflect the physical reality rather than the inner assumption. He may be careful in his private mental imagery and in his deliberate visualization practice, but in casual conversation, under the pressure of social expectation or simple habit, he returns to describing himself as a man who is working toward wealth, who is trying to improve his financial situation, who hopes things will get better. Each such statement is not merely an inaccurate description, it is an act of creative assumption, an impression driven into the subconscious through the mechanism of spoken declaration that directly contradicts the assumption he is attempting to inhabit. The subconscious does not distinguish between the deliberate imaginal act and the casual spoken description. Both are received as inner states, and both inform the dominant assumption. The man who carefully cultivates his inner imagery, but casually speaks his physical reality back into dominance, is working at cross purposes with himself. The done deal ends this cycle, the cycle of monitoring, of anxious examination, of the compulsive return to the physical evidence as the final authority on what is real, permanently by replacing its cause, not by suppressing the impulse to check, but by dissolving the assumption that generates the impulse. The man who genuinely inhabits the assumption of completion does not experience the pull toward monitoring, because monitoring is the activity of an uncertain man, and certainty, by its nature, does not seek confirmation. This is the most practically significant distinction between the done deal as a genuine inner state and the done deal as an intellectual construct that the man holds in his conscious mind while his subconscious holds a different, older, more deeply conditioned assumption. The intellectual construct produces anxiety-driven monitoring. The genuine inner state produces the unhurried, undemonstrative settledness of a man who no longer has anything to check, because what he needed to know is already known. Neville's teaching on the subject of monitoring also illuminates what he means when he describes the correct relationship between the practitioner and the bridge of incidents. The bridge, the series of events through which the physical world organizes itself around the inner assumption, is not something the man can or should monitor. It is not something he can predict, engineer, or evaluate for adequacy. His only relationship to the bridge is one of readiness and response. He remains alert to the doors that open, responsive to the movement that the bridge creates, and entirely undisturbed by the doors that have not yet opened. This is only possible from within the assumption of completion. The man who is monitoring, who is looking at the bridge, like and asking whether it is adequate, whether it is moving fast enough, whether it is leading in the right direction, is not in the done deal. He is in the state of the man who is waiting and uncertain, and the bridge, which was building in response to his assumption of completion, begins to dissolve in response to the assumption of waiting that the monitoring reveals. The relationship between monitoring anxiety and the assumption of lack is, in Neville's framework, a relationship of mutual reinforcement that cannot be broken from the outside. The man cannot discipline himself out of monitoring anxiety by effort of will, because the anxiety is not produced by a failure of discipline, it is produced by an assumption. And the assumption cannot be corrected by argument, suppression, or the accumulation of evidence, because assumptions do not respond to arguments. They respond only to other assumptions, specifically to the persistent inhabitation of a competing assumption that gradually displaces them as the dominant creative state. The only correction for monitoring anxiety is the done deal itself, not as a technique deployed against the anxiety, but as the genuine inner state that by its own nature makes the anxiety obsolete. When the assumption of completion is real, the monitoring ceases not because the man has disciplined himself to stop looking, but because there is genuinely nothing left to look for. This understanding also reframes the role of patience in the creative process. Patience, in the conventional understanding, is the ability to endure waiting without losing hope, a virtue exercised in the presence of delay. In Neville's framework, patience is something different. It is the quality of the man who is not waiting at all, because waiting is the posture of a man who does not have what he desires. And the man in the done deal is not in that posture. What looks like patience from the outside is, from the inside, simply the natural unhurriedness of a man who is not in a race, because the destination has already been reached in the only dimension where destinations are real. This is a profound reframing. The man who is patient while monitoring is still in the state of not yet. He is simply enduring it more gracefully than the man who is impatient while monitoring. Neither has exited the state of incompletion. The man in the done deal has exited it entirely. And what appears to others as patience is simply his natural response to living in a reality he has already claimed. The eradication of manifestation anxiety, which is the practical result of the done deal fully inhabited, has consequences that extend beyond the specific object of the man's desire. The anxiety that drives the monitoring of results is not narrowly targeted at a single desired outcome. It is the expression of a fundamental assumption about the man's relationship to the universe. The assumption that the universe is not reliably on his side, that the creative process may or may not work, that evidence is needed before certainty is justified. This assumption, when it governs a man's inner life, produces anxiety not only in relation to his specific financial desires, but in relation to every domain of his life. And the done deal, when genuinely inhabited, does not merely calm the specific anxiety about wealth. It alters the fundamental assumption about the man's relationship to the creative process of the universe, establishing at depth the certainty that his inner state governs his outer reality, not the other way around. This shift, when it occurs, is among the most consequential transformations available to a human consciousness. Wattles saw it as the entry into the certain way. Neville saw it as the full expression of the creative authority that is the birthright of every man. The synthesis of Wattles' warning and Neville's explanation on the subject of monitoring produces a practical directive that is both simple and demanding. Inhabit the assumption of completion so completely and persist in it with such depth and consistency that the impulse to check for evidence never arises. Not resist the impulse to check. Not when you feel the impulse, redirect your attention. Inhabit the assumption so fully that the impulse has no root in which to grow. Because the assumption of incompletion, the soil in which monitoring anxiety grows, has been replaced at depth by the assumption that the done deal is already signed, already settled, already the permanent inner reality from which the physical world will, in its own time and through its own bridge of incidents, deliver the confirmation that is not a surprise but simply a formality. This is the standard. It is demanding. It is the standard that Neville Goddard taught, without apology and without reduction, because he understood that anything less was not the done deal at all, but simply a more sophisticated form of hoping, dressed in the vocabulary of certainty. Wattles' injunction against monitoring, when fully understood through Neville's lens, also sheds light on the practical question of how long the man must persist in the done deal before the physical world confirms it. This question itself contains a monitoring assumption, the implicit suggestion that there is a point at which the physical world will deliver its confirmation and the done deal will be vindicated. Neville does not frame it this way. The physical manifestation is not the vindication of the done deal. It is its inevitable expression, the reflection of a fact that was already established in the inner world before the physical world organized itself to confirm it. The done deal does not require vindication. It is, by definition, already done. The man's task is not to persist until the physical world confirms what he knows. His task is to persist in knowing it, without reference to confirmation. For as long as it takes the physical world to catch up to the inner reality that governs it, and the moment he stops needing the confirmation, the moment the assumption is so genuinely inhabited that the physical manifestation would be welcome but is not required, is precisely the moment that confirms the done deal is real. Because that moment of non-neediness is the signature of genuine possession. And genuine possession in the inner world is the cause of genuine possession in the outer one. Neville Goddard's primary method for entering the done deal state is not a breathing exercise, a journaling practice, or a cognitive reframing technique. It is a specific exploitation of a specific state of consciousness that exists naturally in every human being, a state that Neville called the state akin to sleep, which he referred to in his teaching by the initials that stand for this phrase. This is the hypnagogic state, the drowsy, threshold condition between full waking consciousness and sleep, in which the critical, analytical faculty of the conscious mind relaxes its grip, and the subconscious becomes maximally receptive to impression. Neville identified this state not as a curiosity of neurology, but as the primary gateway through which the creative intelligence of the subconscious can be accessed and programmed directly, bypassing the resistance that the critical conscious mind would otherwise apply to impressions that contradict the established dominant assumption. The state akin to sleep is, in this sense, the door through which the done deal is installed. The reason this state is uniquely effective for the purpose Neville prescribes is precisely its liminal character. In ordinary waking consciousness, the critical faculty is fully engaged. It evaluates every incoming impression against the existing framework of what is believed to be true, and it rejects impressions that violate the established belief structure. This is why affirmations, applied in full waking consciousness, frequently fail to penetrate to the level of actual assumption. The critical mind hears the affirmation, compares it against the dominant assumption of lack, finds a contradiction, and dismisses the affirmation as untrue. The impression never reaches the subconscious in a form that the subconscious can accept as established fact. In the state akin to sleep, the critical faculty is dormant. The subconscious is exposed and receptive, and the impression that arrives in that state, the vivid, feeling-laden imaginal scene of the desired reality already accomplished, is received not as a claim to be evaluated, but as an experience to be recorded. This is the precise mechanism by which the done deal is installed below the level of conscious resistance. The content of what Neville prescribes for the state akin to sleep is specific and frequently misunderstood. He does not instruct the practitioner to replay a movie of receiving wealth, a cinematic vision of circumstances improving, of money arriving, of dreams being achieved. This type of visualization, however vivid, has a structural problem. It is a vision of receiving, and receiving implies a moment of transition, which implies a prior state of not having. Even in imagination, it positions the practitioner as the man watching the arrival of something from outside, rather than the man who already has it. Neville instructs something far more precise: the construction of a short, single scene, no more than a moment in time, that implies the desires already fulfilled, constructed from within the life of the man who already possesses it. The handshake after the deal is concluded, the quiet glance at a bank statement that reflects the desired balance, with no reaction other than the satisfaction of a man for whom this is entirely normal. The casual conversation between the practitioner and someone in his life in which his wealth is acknowledged as an established, unremarkable fact. The word implies, in Neville's instruction, carries enormous weight, and it is a word he uses with deliberate precision. The scene must imply the fulfillment rather than depict it. It must be structured so that the only way the scene could be occurring is if the desire is already fulfilled. But it should not itself be the scene of fulfillment. This distinction is the difference between imagining the moment of winning and imagining the taken-for-granted quality of a man who won long enough ago that the winning is no longer the fact of interest. His current, abundant life is. The scene that implies completion operates at a deeper level of assumption than the scene that depicts completion, because it does not contain within it any reference to the transition between states. There is no before embedded in it. There is only the after, presented as so firmly established that it requires no contrast to appear real. This is the architecture of an imaginal act that the subconscious will accept as a genuine memory, as a fact from which the physical world will be constructed. The feeling tone of this scene is at least as important as its content, and Neville addresses this with equal precision. The scene is not to be performed with excitement. with the intense vividness of a man trying very hard to convince his subconscious of something. Intensity of effort in the imaginal act signals, at a subconscious level, that the man is trying to overcome a resistance, that he is working against a dominant assumption of lack. The feeling that Neville prescribes for the imaginal scene is what he calls naturalness. The tone of a man engaged in an ordinary moment of his ordinary life, which happens to be the life of a man who already has what he desired. The wealthy man who is genuinely wealthy does not feel his wealth with extraordinary intensity in the casual moments of his day. He feels it the way he feels gravity, as an unremarkable constant, the background condition of his existence. This quality of naturalness, achieved in the imaginal act during the state akin to sleep, is the precise feeling tone that the subconscious accepts as genuine memory. The practice Neville prescribes is, in its execution, demanding in a way that has nothing to do with effort. It is not demanding because the imaginal scene is complex or because the state akin to sleep is difficult to enter. It is demanding because the practitioner must bring to the imaginal act a quality of inner honesty that reveals immediately whether the feeling of naturalness is genuine or performed. Most men who attempt this practice can construct the scene. Very few can inhabit it with the quality of taken-for-grantedness that Neville requires, because that quality requires the absence of the assumption of lack. And the assumption of lack is, for most men, so deeply conditioned, so long established as the dominant inner state, that it reasserts itself even within the imaginal act. The man feels the scene, and within the feeling he senses the effort of it, the trying, the pushing against the old assumption, the subtle awareness that what he is inhabiting is not his actual life, but a desired one. This awareness is not a failure of imagination. It is honest feedback about the depth at which the new assumption has penetrated. And it is the starting point for the persistence that Neville requires. Neville is explicit that the state akin to sleep practice is to be performed consistently, particularly at the threshold moments of sleep and waking, when the hypnagogic state is most naturally available. He does not specify a minimum number of repetitions or a minimum duration, because the criterion for success is not repetition, but penetration. The imaginal act is to be performed until the scene feels genuinely natural, until the man can inhabit the feeling of completion without the effortful quality of a man overcoming resistance. Because the old assumption has been sufficiently displaced by the new one, that the new one is becoming his default inner state. This may require days of practice. It may require weeks. But the practitioner's relationship to this time frame should itself reflect the done deal. He is not counting the days to see if enough repetitions have been accumulated. He is performing the imaginal act with the unhurried consistency of a man who already knows the outcome and is simply observing, without anxiety, the process by which the inner assumption deepens until it becomes the dominant creative law of his subconscious. The subconscious mind's inability to distinguish between a physically experienced event and a vividly felt imaginal one is not a speculation in Neville's teaching. It is the foundation of his entire practical method, and it is a principle that converges with understanding from multiple independent directions. The subconscious records experience, not source. It does not append to each impression a note about whether it arrived through the physical senses or through the imagination. It records the felt quality of the impression, the emotional signature, the sense of reality that attended it. And these, not the channel of delivery, are what determine the depth and permanence of the impression in the subconscious record. This is why Neville's state akin to sleep method is not a trick or workaround. It is the direct exploitation of the actual mechanism by which the subconscious is always being programmed. Through the felt quality of inner experience, redirected toward the deliberate installation of the desired assumption rather than the accidental reinforcement of the existing one. What the subconscious accepts as established fact becomes, through a process that Neville does not fully mechanize, but that operates with absolute consistency, the organizing principle of the man's physical experience. The subconscious, having accepted the imaginal memory of wealth as a genuine experiential fact, proceeds to organize the man's perception, his decision-making, his presence in every interaction, and, through the bridge of incidents, the circumstances that form in his life, in ways that are consistent with the world of a man who is wealthy. This is not a gradual shift in attitude. It is a fundamental reorganization of the man's creative assumption, which is the fundamental reorganization of the world he will experience. The state, akin to sleep method, is the instrument by which this reorganization is initiated at the deepest available level, below the reach of the critical faculty that would otherwise prevent the new assumption from displacing the old one. One practical implication of the state akin to sleep method that Neville emphasizes is the importance of the last thought before sleep. He teaches that the thoughts and feelings at the moment of sleep carry a disproportionate weight in the impression they make on the subconscious. That the hypnagogic threshold is a particularly potent channel for the installation of assumption. The man who falls asleep in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, who enters sleep from within the done deal, with the last conscious impression being the naturalness and completeness of the desired state, is feeding that assumption directly into the most receptive state of the subconscious, without competition from the waking critical faculty. And the subconscious processes this impression throughout the sleep cycle, weaving it into the fabric of the man's deep assumption structure in a way that waking practice alone does not reach. This is why Neville consistently emphasizes the transition to sleep as the most important moment of the entire practice. The moment when the gate between the conscious and the subconscious is widest open, and the impression that passes through it will be accepted not as a candidate for evaluation, but as an established fact. Neville also addresses the question of what to do when the imaginal scene dissolves before sleep arrives, when the practitioner's attention drifts, when the scene loses its feeling tone, when the mind wanders to the ordinary concerns of the day. His instruction is characteristically undramatic. Simply return to the scene. Not with frustration, not with the corrective urgency of a man who has failed. Simply, quietly, with the patience of a man who knows what he is doing and is doing it without distress. Each return to the scene is not a recovery from failure. It is a repetition that deepens the impression. The subconscious is not counting failures. It is accumulating impressions. Each time the man returns to the feeling of completion, that feeling is reinforced. Each time the scene is inhabited with genuine naturalness, even for a moment, the new assumption grows more deeply embedded in the subconscious structure from which the man's physical world is built. The state akin to sleep technique is, in Neville's complete teaching, both the beginning and the measure of the done deal. It is the beginning because it is the primary instrument by which the new assumption is installed below the level of conscious resistance. And it is the measure because the ease with which the feeling of naturalness is achieved in the state akin to sleep. The degree to which the scene feels taken for granted rather than effortfully inhabited is the most accurate available indicator of how deeply the new assumption has penetrated. When the practitioner can enter the scene in the state akin to sleep and feel, immediately and without effort, the unremarkable satisfaction of a man for whom wealth is simply his normal life. When there is no effort, no pushing against resistance, no sense of trying to convince himself of something he does not yet fully believe. The done deal has moved from practice to law. The assumption has hardened, and what is hardened will express itself. This is not a promise. It is a description of a mechanism that was in operation long before any individual man began to study it, and that will continue to operate long after. Faithfully, impersonally, responding always to assumption, as it always has. Every man who has failed to manifest what he desires has failed not for the reasons he believes. He has not failed because he lacks the right technique, or because he has not visualized with sufficient vividness, or because the universe has withheld its cooperation for reasons beyond his understanding. He has failed for one precise and irrefutable reason. He has been succeeding at assuming the wrong thing. This formulation, which belongs to Neville Goddard and must be understood in the precise terms he intended, is not a redistribution of blame. It is a description of the mechanism. The assumption of lack is just as creative as the assumption of abundance. The law does not favor one assumption over another. It amplifies whatever assumption the man holds with the most depth, consistency, and persistence. And for the majority of men, the most deeply held, most consistently inhabited, most persistently reinforced assumption is not the one they express in their conscious mind. It is the one they have never consciously examined. The foundational assumption of lack that was installed in their subconscious before they had the capacity to question it. The phrase, assuming the wrong thing, is precise in its implications, and each word requires examination. To assume is not to think, not to hope, and not to believe in the conventional sense. It is to inhabit a state of consciousness so completely that it becomes the lens through which all experience is perceived and all evidence is interpreted. The wrong thing is not simply a false statement about one's financial situation. It is a specific inner state. The state of the man for whom wealth belongs to others, for whom abundance is something that happens to people with different qualities, different histories, different inherent worth. This state is not a single thought. It is a configuration of consciousness that expresses itself in every financial decision, every response to opportunity, every casual feeling that arises in the presence of money. A configuration so deeply established that the man who holds it can spend years earnestly attempting to manifest wealth while, at every moment, at the deepest level, assuming with absolute consistency that wealth is not his to have. Neville is precise on the structure of this failure, because he understands that the man who visualizes wealth while assuming lack at depth is not simply failing to manifest. He is creating what he is assuming. The surface assumption says abundance. The foundational assumption says lack, and the creative law responds to the foundational assumption, not the surface one, because the foundational assumption is the dominant state. The one the man inhabits most consistently, most automatically, most deeply. The surface assumption is a visitor, held consciously, with effort, for the duration of the visualization practice. The foundational assumption is a resident, operating continuously, without effort, as the background condition of the man's entire inner life. The universe, or in Neville's precise language, the subconscious creative intelligence, does not arbitrate between these two assumptions by counting the hours each is consciously held. It responds to the one that has the deepest root, the longest habitation, the most pervasive expression in the man's actual felt experience of his life. And that assumption is almost always the assumption of lack. This split between the surface and the foundational assumption explains a phenomenon that many practitioners of manifestation methods report with confusion. The occasional, apparently random manifestation of a desired reality, followed by its dissolution or its failure to be sustained. The man who sometimes manifests and sometimes does not, who achieves a breakthrough and then loses it, who advances and retreats with a consistency that feels maddeningly arbitrary, is a man whose surface assumption of abundance is occasionally strong enough to produce results, but whose foundational assumption of lack is strong enough to dissolve those results before they can become permanent. The done deal, as Neville teaches it, is not designed to produce occasional results. It is designed to permanently replace the foundational assumption, to make the assumption of completion the deeply inhabited, automatically operative, dominant state of consciousness from which all of the man's experience proceeds. Not an occasional peak, a permanent baseline. The dissolution of the foundational assumption of lack is not achieved by arguing with it. Neville is clear that the critical faculty of the conscious mind is not the correct instrument for this work. The foundational assumption does not respond to logic, to counter-evidence, or to the earnest insistence of a man who has decided to believe differently. It was not installed through logic. It was installed through feeling, through the repeated, vividly experienced felt sense of being a person for whom lack is the normal condition. And it is dissolved only through the same mechanism that installed it, through the repeated, vividly felt, genuinely inhabited feeling of its opposite. This is why the state akin to sleep technique is so specifically important. It bypasses the level at which the foundational assumption defends itself, the critical, analytical level of the waking conscious mind, and deposits the new assumption directly into the subconscious stratum where the old assumption lives. The new assumption grows there, in the same soil, through the same mechanism of habituated feeling, until it is deep enough and persistent enough to displace the old one as the dominant creative force. The process of dissolution also requires an honest reckoning with the specific content of the foundational assumption of lack, a reckoning that most men avoid because the foundational assumption is often not simply, "I don't have money." It is frequently something more specific and more personal. I am not the kind of person who has money. Wealth brings corruption. I don't deserve financial ease. People like me don't accumulate wealth. These specific formulations are not conscious beliefs in the sense of being held and examined. They are deeply embedded assumptions that express themselves as automatic emotional responses, as involuntary interpretations of events, as the subtly different treatment the man receives from himself when he makes a financial decision. They are the specific architecture of the foundational assumption of lack, and the done deal must dissolve not just the general state of incompletion, but these specific configurations within it. Because each one is a distinct creative assumption generating a distinct category of limitation in the man's financial experience. The question of self-concept is, in Neville's framework, inseparable from the question of the foundational assumption. The deepest assumption a man holds is not an assumption about his circumstances. It is an assumption about himself, about what he is, what he deserves, what is possible for him specifically, as the particular human being he has come to believe himself to be. This self-concept is the most creative assumption in the man's entire inner life, because it colors every other assumption he holds and governs the ceiling of every manifestation he produces. A man whose self-concept includes the identity of a wealthy person inhabits the done deal from the inside of that identity. And the manifestation of wealth is not an anomaly in his life, but the natural expression of who he is. A man whose self-concept does not include this identity can apply every technique Neville teaches and still fail to manifest. Because the deepest assumption, "This is not who I am," overrides every surface instruction. The done deal requires, ultimately, the revision of self-concept, the inhabitation of the identity of a man for whom wealth is not a goal, but a nature. The replacement of the foundational assumption is not a linear process. It does not proceed from 90% lack to 50% lack to 10% lack with smooth, measurable progress. It proceeds with the irregular quality of any deep structural change, with periods of apparent progress followed by resurgences of the old assumption, with moments of genuine inhabitation of the new state followed by moments of unexpected reversion. These reversions are not failures. They are the old assumption's final expressions of dominance before the new one displaces it permanently. The man who understands this maintains the practice of the done deal through the reversions without interpreting them as evidence that the process is failing. He understands that the depth of the old assumption's root is a measure of the persistence required, not a measure of the possibility of success. And he continues, quietly, consistently, without drama, until the new assumption is so completely the dominant state that the reversions cease to occur. Neville's teaching on the relationship between the foundational assumption and the physical evidence of the man's life has a liberating implication that must be allowed to settle fully before proceeding. If the physical evidence of lack is the product of the foundational assumption of lack, then the physical evidence is not information about what is possible. It is information about what has been assumed. It says nothing whatsoever about the future. It says nothing about the man's inherent capacity or his inherent worth. It says only this: the assumption that produced this evidence has been the dominant creative force in this man's subconscious for this period of his life. And since the assumption is within the man's dominion, since it can be changed through the mechanism of the done deal by persistent inhabitation of a competing assumption, the physical evidence of the past has no authority over the physical reality of the future. The done deal is not hindered by the depth of the evidence against it. It is only hindered by the depth of the assumption that produced that evidence. And that assumption is always replaceable. The fatal assumption of lack, once genuinely dissolved and replaced by the done deal, does not leave quietly. There is a specific period in the transition which Neville acknowledges and which every sincere practitioner of this teaching will encounter, in which the new assumption of completion has taken root, but the physical world has not yet reorganized itself to reflect it. This is the period of maximum challenge, because it is the period during which the man's life may appear, from the outside, unchanged or even deteriorating, as the old physical conditions persist in their expression of the old assumption, while the new assumption is still building the bridge through which it will physically manifest. The man who misinterprets this period as evidence of failure will return to the old assumption, dissolve the bridge, and restart the cycle from the beginning. The man who understands it as the natural interval between inner change and outer expression will maintain the done deal through this period with the settled patience of a man who planted a seed and is not disturbed by the fact that the ground has not yet broken. The seed is in the soil. The assumption has hardened. What is planted will grow, not because of hope, but because of law. The replacement of the foundational assumption of lack with the genuine assumption of completion is, in the full scope of Neville Goddard's teaching, not merely the path to financial manifestation. It is the restoration of the man's full creative authority over his own experience of life. The authority that was never absent, but was being exercised unconsciously and perpetually in the service of the wrong assumption. Every man is always creating. The only question is what he is creating from. The man who inhabits the foundational assumption of lack is creating with perfect consistency and perfect fidelity to the law, a world that reflects that assumption in every domain of his experience. The man who replaces that assumption with a done deal, who inhabits the assumption of completion at the level of self-concept, of daily feeling, of the last thought before sleep, is creating with the same perfect consistency and the same perfect fidelity, a world that reflects the inner reality he has chosen to make permanent. The law does not distinguish between these men. It serves both equally. The difference between them is not talent or luck or cosmic favor. It is assumption. It is always only assumption. Neville Goddard's instruction to live from the end is one of the most consequential directives in the entirety of metaphysical literature. And it is also one of the most frequently misunderstood. The misunderstanding almost always takes the same form. The student reads the instruction and interprets it as a directive to perform the experience of having the desired reality, to act as if wealth is present, to speak as if abundance is established, to simulate the behaviors of the wealthy man as a kind of external imitation. This interpretation produces a practice that feels hollow and eventually collapses, because the man is performing the outward expression of a state he has not actually entered. Neville does not instruct performance. He instructs inhabitation. The difference is not cosmetic. Performance is the activity of a man outside a state attempting to simulate its appearance. Inhabitation is the activity of a man inside a state, expressing its natural quality. One is theater, the other is creation. To live from the end, in Neville's precise sense, is to make every decision, not occasionally, not in deliberate practice sessions, not when it is convenient or easy, but in every moment, in every response, in every casual inner choice. From the perspective of the man who already has what he desires. This is not a behavioral directive. It is a directive about the inner standpoint from which behavior arises. The man living from the end is not asking himself, before each decision, what would a wealthy man do here? Because that question reveals that he is standing outside the state of being wealthy and attempting to simulate its outputs. The man genuinely living from the end does not need to ask the question, because he is already inside the state. His decisions arise naturally from the assumption he inhabits. The way a genuinely happy man's behavior arises naturally from his happiness, without requiring him to consult a list of how happy people behave. The daily practice of living from the end has specific and demanding implications for the man who applies it honestly. It means that when he encounters a financial decision, he relates to it from the inner certainty of the man who is already wealthy. Not with the calculation of a man who is trying to get wealthy, but with the judgment of a man for whom wealth is already the background condition of his life. It means that when he encounters an opportunity, he evaluates it from within that state. Not, could this be my big break? But the quieter, more grounded assessment of a man who already has enough that no single opportunity carries the desperate weight of being the one that might finally change everything. It means that when he encounters a setback, he meets it as what it is from the perspective of the done deal. Not a threat to a goal not yet reached, but a temporary condition in a life whose fundamental reality is already established and not in question. This last point, the relationship between the done deal and setbacks, is one of the most practically significant and most difficult aspects of living from the end to maintain. The setback is the moment when the physical world presents its most insistent argument against the done deal. The failed transaction, the unexpected expense, the business that does not develop as hoped. Each of these is the physical world presenting evidence of the old assumption, the evidence that was generated by the assumption before the done deal was installed, now appearing in the physical timeline with the delayed expression of its original cause. The man who understands the done deal relates to this evidence correctly, as the past expressing itself in the present, not as the present predicting the future. He does not allow the setback to revise his inner assumption, because he understands that the inner assumption governs the future, and the setback belongs to the past. He meets the setback as a wealthy man meets a temporary inconvenience, not with panic, not with the reassessment of his fundamental inner state, but with the measured, purposeful response of a man whose foundation is not threatened by the weather. Living from the end also transforms the quality of the man's attention. The man who is living toward the end, who is working in the direction of a desired future, distributes his attention primarily between the gap between his current state and the desired one, and the hope that the gap is closing. The man living from the end distributes his attention very differently. He attends to his current life from within the assumption of completion, which means that he notices and responds to the elements of his current life that are consistent with the desired state, the opportunities, the connections, the seeds of development, rather than being primarily organized by what is absent. This is not the positive thinking practice of ignoring what is negative. It is the natural perceptual consequence of the assumption of completion. When you are already wealthy in assumption, you perceive the world as a wealthy man perceives it. And a wealthy man's perception is organized differently from a man in deficit. He sees different things, attends to different signals, and makes different decisions, not because he is trying to, but because the assumption organizes the perception. The discipline of living from the end is particularly tested in conversation, in the social and professional interactions through which the man's assumed identity is constantly being negotiated with the world around him. Other people will, in the early stages of the new assumption, continue to relate to the man as the person he was before the done deal was installed. They will make comments that reflect the old assumption. They will offer advice calibrated to the state of lack. They will be generous with their doubt and liberal with their skepticism. The man living from the end does not argue with these people. He does not correct their assessment of him. He simply relates to them from within his assumption, with the natural, undemonstrative certainty of a man who already knows something about his future that they do not. And in time, as the assumption hardens and the bridge of incidents begins to express itself in the visible world, their assessment of him will change, not because he convinced them, but because the physical evidence of his assumption has become available to their senses. Neville teaches that the most powerful expression of living from the end occurs in what he calls the revision of past conversations and interactions. When the man recalls a conversation in which he responded to a financial question from the state of lack, in which he expressed doubt or limitation or the anxiety of the man who is still waiting, he is invited to revise that conversation in imagination, to replay it as the man he is assuming himself to be, responding with the natural certainty of the done deal. This revision is not about historical accuracy. It is about the reorientation of the subconscious assumption. Every imaginal revision of a past interaction in which the man expressed lack is a deposit of the new assumption into the subconscious, a reinforcement of the identity of the man who inhabits the done deal, applied retroactively to experiences that had been reinforcing the opposite identity. Over time, the accumulated effect of this revision practice is the progressive replacement of the old self-concept with the new one, until the man who inhabits the done deal is no longer making an effort to be the wealthy man in imagination. He has become him, living from the end in the daily, moment-to-moment sense also has a specific relationship with what Neville calls the feeling of the wish fulfilled. This feeling, which is the inner signature of the genuinely inhabited done deal, is not a feeling that can be scheduled for the morning visualization session and then set aside for the rest of the day. It is a feeling that must be cultivated as a persistent background quality of the man's inner experience. A steady, undemonstrative sense of completeness and satisfaction that attends every moment of the day in which the done deal is genuinely inhabited. This is not always possible, and Neville does not demand perfect continuity. What he demands is persistent return, the consistent practice of noticing when the feeling has been lost and returning to it without judgment. The way a man returns his attention to his breath in meditative practice, without criticizing himself for the moment of distraction. Each return deepens the assumption. Each moment of genuine inhabitation, however brief, is a deposit in the subconscious bank that accumulates over time into the wealth of a dominant assumption. The man who lives from the end also inhabits a specific relationship with time that distinguishes him from the man who is living toward the end. The man living toward the end inhabits time as a sequence of events that must occur before the desired state is reached. A timeline to be managed, monitored, and endured. The man living from the end inhabits time as the medium through which what is already true in the inner world becomes apparent in the outer one. For him, the passage of time is not delay, it is process. The days between the assumption of completion and its physical expression are not empty days, not waiting days, not days in which nothing is happening. They are days in which the bridge is being built, in which the creative intelligence of the subconscious is working. Through channels the conscious mind cannot perceive, to organize the physical world around the inner assumption. The man living from the end does not experience these days as time lost. He experiences them as time used, by the mechanism of creation, not by his conscious management of it. One of the most subtle and most important aspects of living from the end concerns the quality of the man's desire. The man living toward the end desires his wealth with an intensity that reflects its absence. He wants it because he does not have it, and the wanting is colored by the pain of the gap between his state and the desired one. The man living from the end does not have this relationship with his desire. The desired state is already inhabited in assumption. He is not wanting what he does not have. He is expressing what he is. And this change in the quality of desire, from the aching pull of absence to the natural satisfaction of presence, is not merely a psychological phenomenon. It is a fundamental change in the creative assumption that governs the subconscious. The universe does not respond to wanting, it responds to having. The man who wants his wealth is assuming lack. The man who has his wealth, in assumption in the inner state he inhabits moment to moment, is assuming completion. And the universe, faithful to assumption alone, responds to each man with the reality his assumption commands. The daily practice of living from the end is ultimately the test of whether the done deal has genuinely been installed or whether it exists only as an intellectual understanding of a principle. A man can understand Neville Goddard's teaching completely at the conceptual level and not live from the end for a single moment of his actual life. The understanding is in the conscious mind. The living is in the assumption. And the assumption is revealed not by what the man says about his inner life, but by the automatic, unreflective quality of his moment-to-moment experience. By the feeling that arises in him when he encounters money, when he imagines his future, when he makes a decision under financial pressure. If that feeling is the feeling of a man for whom wealth is already established, quiet, certain, unremarkable, the done deal is real. If that feeling, beneath whatever surface statement the man has prepared, is the feeling of a man who is still waiting, still hoping, still measuring the gap, the done deal is an intention, not a fact. And intention, without assumption, creates nothing. Living from the end is also the practice that most directly expresses what Neville means by persistence, the quality he identifies as the decisive factor in whether an assumption hardens into fact or dissolves before it reaches that threshold. Persistence is not the heroic, effortful maintenance of a belief against overwhelming opposition. It is something quieter and more fundamental. The daily, unspectacular return to the inner state of completion, regardless of what the physical world is presenting, until that return becomes so habitual, so automatic, so entirely ordinary, that it ceases to feel like a return at all. The man who has truly persisted in living from the end arrives at a point where he does not return to the assumption of completion because he never leaves it. The done deal is not something he does. It is something he is. And that, the full inhabitation of the assumption at the level of being, is the threshold at which Neville says assumption hardens into fact. Not gradually, not partially, completely, irrevocably, as law. Neville Goddard describes a specific and unmistakable inner signal that distinguishes the genuinely inhabited done deal from its intellectual imitation. The sign that separates the assumption that has taken root at the level of the subconscious from the assumption that exists only in the performance of the conscious mind. He calls it the feeling of the wish fulfilled. And its characteristics are as precise and as identifiable as a physical object, once the man knows what he is looking for. It is not a feeling of excitement. Excitement is the feeling of a man who has received an unexpected gift. It carries within it, as its own shadow, the memory of the time before receipt. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is not shadowed by any memory of lack. It is the feeling that exists on the other side of lack, after the transition has been made complete. A deep, organic sense of satisfaction and completeness that requires no external evidence to sustain itself, because it does not arise from external evidence in the first place. The quality that most precisely characterizes the feeling of the wish fulfilled is what Neville calls naturalness. And this word, used with his characteristic precision, means something very specific. The feeling is not extraordinary. It is not the peak emotional experience of a man who has finally achieved what he has long desired. It is the unremarkable inner state of a man for whom the desired reality is simply, unspectacularly, the way things are. The wealthy man who is genuinely wealthy does not carry his wealth as an emotional intensity. He carries it the way he carries his own name, as a constant, automatic, taken for granted feature of his existence that requires no thought, no affirmation, and no protection. When the feeling of the wish fulfilled arises in the practitioner of the done deal, it has this quality: not a peak, not an achievement, but a settling. The sensation of a man who has arrived somewhere and has stopped being in transit. The distinction between the feeling of the wish fulfilled and manufactured excitement is practically significant because many practitioners mistake the second for the first. They cultivate an intense, elevated emotional state in relation to their desired wealth, a feeling of enthusiasm and positive expectation, and interpret this as evidence that the assumption has been successfully inhabited. Neville's framework suggests a different reading. Manufactured excitement is the feeling of a man relating to his desired reality from outside it, of one who is excited about what he does not yet have. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is quieter, less demonstrative, and more permanent. It does not rise and fall with the effort of cultivation. It simply persists as a background quality of the man's inner experience, because it is the natural inner state of a person who actually is what he has assumed himself to be. Its persistence without effort is the surest sign that the assumption has taken root. There is a specific moment in the practice of the done deal that Neville identifies as particularly significant. The moment when the feeling of the wish fulfilled arises for the first time without the man having deliberately entered the imaginal scene. It arises spontaneously in the course of ordinary daily life without prompting. This is the sign Neville points to as the clearest indication that the new assumption has penetrated below the level of conscious practice into the deeper stratum of the subconscious. When the feeling of completion arises in the man, not because he is currently doing his practice, but because it is becoming his default inner state, his natural way of inhabiting his own life. The assumption has crossed a threshold. It has moved from being something the man holds to being something the man is. And what a man is, in assumption, is what the physical world is constructed to reflect. This crossing of the threshold is not dramatic. It arrives quietly, unremarked, as the natural development of a practice that has been maintained with sufficient persistence. The feeling of the wish fulfilled also has a specific relationship with the body that Neville implies, and that experience consistently confirms. The feeling is not purely mental. It has a physical quality, a sense of settledness, of ease, of the absence of the low-level tension that is the body's expression of unresolved desire. The man who is genuinely inhabiting the done deal often notices that the chronic anxiety that attended his financial situation has simply quieted, not because the external situation has resolved, but because the inner assumption has changed. This somatic quality of the feeling of the wish fulfilled is, in its own way, a confirmation of the assumption's depth. The body responds to the assumption as faithfully as the external world does. It simply responds faster, because the distance between assumption and physical expression is shorter within the man's own organism than it is in the wider physical world. The practitioner who notices this somatic settledness is receiving direct feedback that the assumption is taking root at a level deeper than the conscious mind can directly access. Neville teaches that the feeling of the wish fulfilled, once it has become the man's natural inner state, must be maintained not by effort, but by watchfulness, by the alert, steady attention of a man who knows what the feeling is and recognizes when it has been displaced by the intrusion of the old assumption. This watchfulness is not vigilance in the anxious sense. It is the natural self-awareness of a man who knows where he lives and notices when he has wandered. When the feeling of completion is displaced by a moment of doubt, by the sudden impact of a discouraging piece of external evidence, by the involuntary return of the old feeling of lack. The man who recognizes this displacement does not treat it as a catastrophe. He treats it as information. The old assumption attempted a return. He notes it and returns, quietly and without drama, to the state of completion. Each return deepens the groove of the new assumption. Each successful maintenance of the feeling of the wish fulfilled in the face of counter-evidence strengthens the creative force of the done deal. The final sign that the done deal is real, that the assumption has hardened to the degree that physical manifestation is not a possibility, but a certainty, is a quality that Neville describes not as a feeling, but as a knowing. It arrives after the feeling of the wish fulfilled has been persistent long enough to become the man's default inner state. A quiet, deep, entirely undramatic certainty that the desired reality is his. Not that it will be his, that it is, not as a future event, not as a hope, not as a strong belief, but as a fact as settled and as unquestionable as any other fact in the man's direct experience. When this knowing is present, the done deal has ceased to be a practice. It has become a law. And Neville Goddard, across the full body of his teaching, states with the quiet authority of a man who is reporting rather than hoping, facts manifest, always, without exception. At the precise moment when the inner assumption has been held long enough and deeply enough to become the dominant reality the subconscious accepts as the foundation from which the physical world must be constructed. What Neville Goddard teaches, and what emerges with absolute clarity from the full examination of the done deal, is that the future is not built by working toward it. It is constructed by assuming it complete and then living from that completion with the consistency and persistence of a man who has permanently ceased negotiating with reality and permanently begun creating it. This is not a subtle shift in emphasis. It is a fundamental inversion of the relationship between the inner world and the outer one. The majority of men live as though the inner world, their thoughts, their feelings, their assumptions about themselves, is the response to the outer one. They feel abundant when they have money. They feel worthy when others affirm them. They feel complete when the circumstances of their life arrange themselves in the desired configuration. Neville identifies this as the foundational error of the unrealized life. The inversion of cause and effect, the mistaking of the shadow for the substance, the perpetual waiting for an outer permission that never arrives to grant the inner certainty that was always the prerequisite. The done deal corrects this inversion with a precision that no motivational language can achieve, because it operates not at the level of attitude, but at the level of assumption. It does not ask the man to feel better about his circumstances. It asks him to change his dominant assumption about what is real, to take up genuine residence in the inner state of the man who already has what he desires, and to hold that residence with such consistency and depth that the subconscious, receiving the assumption as established fact, proceeds to organize the physical world around it. This is not a technique. It is the understanding of how imagination governs the physical world, and the decision to use that understanding deliberately, without apology, without exception, and without the constant monitoring that signals a man who knows the theory, but does not yet inhabit the truth. The done deal is not difficult because the principle is complex. The principle is simple. It is demanding because it requires the man to give more creative authority to his inner assumption than to the full weight of his current physical reality. To look at the evidence of the physical world and refuse at the level of assumption to allow that evidence to be the final word. Most men cannot do this, not because they lack intelligence or discipline, but because the assumption of lack is so deeply conditioned so long established as the foundational truth of their inner life, that the physical evidence of it feels more real than anything they can hold in imagination. The done deal asks the man to reverse this priority, to treat the imaginal fact as more real than the physical evidence, and to persist in that reversal until the physical world has reorganized itself to confirm what the man has been assuming. This is the demand of the law. It is not reduced by sympathy or simplified by technique. It requires what it requires. The synthesis of the done deal's power lies in three principles that are distinct but inseparable. First, the assumption of completion must be installed at the level of the subconscious, below the reach of conscious resistance through the state akin to sleep and the vividly inhabited imaginal scene. Second, the foundational assumption of lack. The deep, automatic, persistently creative inner state that has been generating the man's current circumstances must be dissolved and replaced. Not by argument, not by suppression, but by the persistent inhabitation of its opposite, until the new assumption becomes the dominant creative force in the subconscious. Third, the daily life must be lived from the end, from within the assumption of completion, from the inner standpoint of the man who already is what he has assumed himself to be, until that standpoint ceases to be an assumption in the effortful sense and becomes simply who the man is. These three principles, operated together with the persistence that Neville demands, constitute the complete architecture of the done deal. The ultimate significance of the done deal is not financial, though it applies with full force to financial reality. Its ultimate significance is what it reveals about the nature of human creative authority. A man who genuinely understands and inhabits the done deal has understood something that cannot be ununderstood. That he is not a creature waiting for the world to provide what he needs, not a supplicant appealing to forces beyond his control, not a passive recipient of whatever circumstances assemble themselves around him. He is the creator of his experience. Not occasionally, not in special moments of inspired action, but continuously through the assumption he inhabits in every moment of every day. The done deal is not the end of a discipline. It is the beginning of a life lived from the full dignity of creative authority. A life in which the man does not wait for permission because he has understood that he was always the one who held it. Neville Goddard wrote and spoke across 4 decades in lectures and in books, with a consistency and certainty that distinguished him from every other voice in the metaphysical tradition of his time. He did not speculate. He did not suggest. He declared, with the precision of a man who has tested his understanding against his own experience and found it reliable beyond question. And at the center of his entire declaration, the principle to which every other teaching was ultimately a tributary, was the principle of the assumption, not the law of attraction, not the power of positive thinking, not the cultivation of confidence or the development of habits. The assumption, the specific, inhabited subconscious state of a man who regards a particular reality as true. That state is the cause. Every experienced reality is its effect. And the man who understands this, genuinely, at depth in the way that produces action rather than intellectual appreciation, is in possession of the most significant understanding available to a human being. The specific contribution of the done deal to the full body of Neville's teaching is its identification of the precise inner posture that transforms the assumption from an intellectual concept into a creative fact. The done deal is the assumption of completion, not the assumption that wealth is possible, not the assumption that it is probable, not the assumption that it will eventually arrive if the man persists with sufficient hope. The assumption that it is done already in the only world that matters for the purposes of creation, the inner world, the world of imagination, the formless dimension in which all physical realities are first constructed before they are expressed in the matter of the physical world. This assumption, when genuinely inhabited, does not produce manifestation as a distant consequence. It is the manifestation, complete in the inner world, awaiting only the natural unfolding of physical time to become apparent in the outer one. The practical wisdom of the done deal is that it removes the one variable that most reliably interrupts the creative process: the monitoring of results by a man who has not yet fully inhabited the assumption of completion. The man who checks whether his wealth is arriving has not signed the completion certificate. He is still in the state of the man who is waiting, who is uncertain, who needs external confirmation that the process is working. Neville teaches that the process does not need the man's monitoring to work. It needs only his assumption. And the assumption of completion, the done deal, is the one inner posture that naturally, without effort, eliminates the monitoring behavior. Because the man who already has does not check for the arrival of what he possesses. The elimination of monitoring is not the goal of the done deal. It is its natural consequence, and it is, paradoxically, one of the clearest signs that the assumption has been genuinely inhabited. Neville Goddard's instruction to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and observe the route that your attention follows contains, in a single sentence, the complete practical method of the done deal. Assume the feeling, not the thought, not the intellectual position, but the actual felt quality of the inner state of the man who has what he desired. Observe the route that attention follows. Notice, without managing or directing, what the mind attends to when it is organized by that assumption rather than by the assumption of lack. What the man discovers when he genuinely inhabits the assumption of completion is that his attention moves differently. It moves toward opportunities that it previously overlooked. It moves toward the elements of his current life that are consistent with the desired state, rather than toward the elements that emphasize the gap. It moves with the quality of a man who is already home, looking around his house, rather than a man who is still outside, peering through the window at a life he has not yet entered. This movement of attention is the beginning of the bridge of incidence. The first physical expression of the assumption that is chained. The teaching that you are greater than you know is the most important and most under-examined claim in Neville's entire body of work. It is not a statement of encouragement. It is a statement of metaphysical fact. The greatness Neville speaks of is not potential. It is not the suggestion that you could become greater if you applied yourself more earnestly. It is the recognition that the creative faculty you possess is not a limited human attribute that must be carefully conserved and strategically deployed. It is the expression, in an individual human consciousness, of the same creative intelligence that constructed the universe. The imagination that is not merely a faculty for generating mental images, but the actual substance of all things. The formless material from which every physical reality has been and will be constructed. To understand this is not to be inspired. It is to understand what you actually are. And from that understanding, the done deal is not an ambitious practice. It is simply the appropriate use of a faculty whose nature was never in question. The instruction to observe what is within, to recognize that the world of appearances however convincing, is the shadow of an inner reality and not the other way around, is Neville's most consistent and most radical reorientation of the human mind. Every man has been trained, from the first moment of his conscious experience, to treat the physical world as the primary reality and his inner states as secondary responses to it. Neville inverts this priority completely, and he inverts it not as a philosophical position, but as a practical instruction with verifiable consequences. The man who begins to treat his inner assumption as the primary reality and the physical world as its secondary expression will, if he persists in this reorientation, begin to see the physical world respond to the inner state with a fidelity that makes the inversion undeniable, not as a matter of belief, as a matter of observable experience. And each confirmation deepens the understanding until the man no longer needs to maintain the inversion by effort of will, because it has become the obvious truth of his actual experience. The message of the done deal, in its ultimate form, is not about wealth. Wealth is the specific domain of this examination, and it is a domain to which the principle applies with full force. But the ultimate message is about creative authority, about the recognition that a man is not what his circumstances tell him he is, that his history is not his destiny, that the assumption he holds about himself is not a description of a fixed nature, but the cause of an experience that can be changed at any moment by the change of the assumption. Neville Goddard taught this with the urgency of a man who understood that the majority of human suffering is not the inevitable consequence of external conditions, but the predictable consequence of wrong assumption. Of men and women inhabiting, with perfect creative consistency, the state of beings for whom things do not work out, for whom wealth is always slightly out of reach, for whom the desired life remains permanently in the future tense. The done deal is the correction of this. It is the restoration of the man to his creative sovereignty. Your wealth is not approaching. It is not pending. It is not held in reserve, waiting for circumstances to align, or for effort to be appropriately rewarded, or for some cosmic accounting to confirm that you have earned the right to receive it. It is done, in the only dimension where anything is ever first created, the physical world that you occupy, with all its apparent independence, all its weight and solidity, all its insistence that it is the final authority on what is real, is not the source of your wealth. It is its reflection. The source is the assumption. The source is the inner state you inhabit, moment to moment, in the unremarkable course of your daily life. And that inner state is within your dominion. It has always been within your dominion. The only question that has ever been relevant, is whether you will exercise that dominion deliberately, or whether you will continue to allow it to be exercised by the accumulated force of unconscious conditioning. What Neville Goddard offers is not a different way to work harder, not a more sophisticated approach to goal setting, not a framework for improving the efficiency of your striving. He offers the recognition of a law that was operative before you were born and will be operative after you are gone. The law that says assumptions harden into fact, that the imagination governs the physical, that what a man assumes himself to be is what the world he inhabits will be constructed to confirm. This law does not require your belief in order to operate. It is operating right now, in your life, on whatever assumption you are currently holding most deeply and most consistently. The question is not whether the law applies to you. The question is whether you will choose the assumption it is operating on. The decision to inhabit the done deal is not made once. It is made continuously. In every moment when the physical world presents its evidence of the old assumption, and the man chooses, consciously and deliberately, to return to the inner state of the man who has already signed the completion certificate. This is what persistence means in Neville's framework. Not the heroic, dramatic resistance of a man fighting against overwhelming odds, but the quiet, daily, unremarkable choice to return. To return to the feeling of completion when the feeling of lack attempts to reassert itself. To return to the inner state of the man who already has when the physical world insists that the man does not yet have. To return without drama and without distress until the return is no longer necessary. Until the man has arrived so fully in the assumption of completion that there is no longer any returning to do, because there is nowhere else he lives. The challenge that now stands before you is not intellectual. You have already understood the principle. Understanding the principle is the beginning of the work, not its completion. The challenge is inhabitation, the actual, daily, persistent occupation of the inner state of the man, for whom wealth is already done, already established, already the unremarkable background condition of his existence. The challenge is to enter the state akin to sleep tonight, with the scene that implies fulfillment, to feel it with the naturalness of the taken for granted, and to fall asleep inside that feeling. The challenge is to wake tomorrow from inside the assumption of completion, and to make the first decision of the day from within that assumption rather than from within the default state of the man who is still hoping. The challenge is to do this not once, not for a week, but for as long as the law requires, which is as long as it takes for the assumption to harden, for the old assumption to dissolve, for the subconscious to accept the done deal as the established fact from which the physical world will be built. Write in the comments below, "It is done." Write it not as an aspiration, not as a declaration of intent, not as an affirmation to be rehearsed, not as the statement of a man who is trying to believe. Write it as the statement of a man who has signed the completion certificate, who has, in the inner world that governs all outer ones, already received what he came here to claim, and mean it with the full weight of what you have understood today, that the physical world is not the authority on what is real, that the assumption you inhabit is the creative cause of every condition you experience, and that the wealth you desire is not somewhere in the future waiting to be earned. It is already done. In the imagination, in the assumption, in the only dimension where creation actually occurs. The physical world will catch up. It always does. Not because you forced it, because you assumed it. And assumptions persisted in, harden into fact. If this examination has reached the level of genuine understanding, if what you have encountered here has landed not merely as information, but as recognition, the feeling of a man who has heard something he already knew but had never seen, articulated with this precision, subscribe to this channel and press the notification bell so that the next examination reaches you when it arrives. The teachings of the masters of the mind are not entertainment. They are not content. They are the transmission of laws that the majority of men never encounter in a form they can actually use. This channel exists for the minority who are ready to use them. If you are in that minority, you already know it. And the path forward from here is not more watching, not more learning, not more preparation. The path forward is the assumption. Inhabit it. Persist in it. Live from it. The rest will follow.